My parents completely lost their minds and decided to take 4 of the 5 kids still living at home on an epic trip from our home in Dallas, Texas, all the way up to Maine in a car. So we piled in our blue Ford Fairlane with the bucket seats. Let's count: 2 boys, 2 girls, 2 adults, seats 5, bucket seats. It was hump day every day for somebody. We were coming up to the 1964 World's Fair, and we stopped in DC to do the White House and museums. One day we were at the National Gallery of Art, and I was mesmerized. I had never seen so much art all in one place, and it was like I was being drawn from painting to painting, like they were each calling my name. Soon enough, I got separated from my parents. I was 10 at the time, but I don't recall realizing that I was alone. I do remember the tortured look on my parents' face when they finally spotted me and came running over with a guard in tow. And I got an earful, as you can imagine. So I just looked at my aggrieved parents and I said, "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" Oh. It had worked for Jesus, why not for me? They were not amused. Now, as a parent, I'm surprised they let me live. The power of art took a hold of me early. It didn't even matter what form it was in. And as I grew older, I was becoming much more aware of what it took to make art. And so now I'm really preoccupied with the power of creation. I need books made out of paper, because do you do this? Sometimes you're reading on the left side of the page and you imagine that at one time the right side was completely blank. It could be writing that would seem so effortless, not worked and reworked and cried and sweatered over draft after draft. It might seem so easy in final form, but at one time that author had to stare down that blank page and bring something from it. Ex nihilo, something from nothing. I need to lay out the God thing for you to my way of thinking, so, put your waders on. For many years, I thought of God as my operating principle, which really doesn't sound like much unless you try to get through life without one. Actually, I thought of God as my grand operating principle, but the acronym is unfortunate. Well, that was before I heard Ezra say that God is the antimatter, so, that sounds right. Thank you. Like most of you, I got that early lesson when we were in Sunday school: God is love, God is love, God is love, God is love. Boy, they didn't have much to say. God is love. I say, okay, God is love. And in time, they threw in the omniscient, the omnipresent, all that kind of stuff, which was reassuring or powerful or, maybe just creepy. Then I experienced love. The joy of it, the messiness, the exhilaration, the exasperation, the unwelcome vulnerability of it. They were right. God is probably love. But then, too, I thought, being loved and loving are when we feel most alive, isn't it? And I think that's what we were meant to feel. We were created to feel most alive. In the beginning, God created up, down, and all around, and then God decided that maybe we could be trusted with creating a few things, so God said we could name things. Name everything you like, God says. Just not me. Don't even try. And then if you follow the thinking of Isaac Luria, I'm not talking about Donna and Warren's son, I'm talking about the 16th century father of Kabbalah, the Jewish tradition of Kabbalah. God withdrew in order to make a space for ongoing creation. This is what he called the Zimzum. T-Z-I-M, T-Z-U-M, Zimzum. It's one of the funnest words ever. Say it, Zimzum. Woohoo! Theologian Molly Marshall, God, I love this woman. Holly sent something around she wrote this week. She's the president of Central Baptist Theological Seminary. Thank you very much. Her students call her an ecumeniac. Because she's open to different traditions. She talks about the Zimzum and that this opening is God's invitation to the dance of creation so that the world might continue to flourish. It is this spirit marked by mystery and inspiration. It is the spirit that is our dance partner when we create. This abiding presence in our lives is God's signature. All right, let's take a brief stop for blasphemy, shall we? If you're thinking, well, I don't have to listen to her, that's not the blasphemous part. If you're thinking, I don't have to listen to this because I'm not a creative, I haven't made anything since 6th grade art studies, I have to break it to you, it's kind of blasphemous. We're all creative. We were created to be creative. I'm not talking about creative bookkeeping. I'm talking about bringing something from nothing, which is something we actually do every day, whether we're attentive to it or not. We're doing it now. And though we have a bad habit of looking for dualisms wherever we can find them, neuroscience are enjoying a debate these days about whether that left brain, right brain division is really true. Are we so neatly decided? We are fearfully and wonderfully made. It is likely not so simple. One of my great joys of teaching at the prison is seeing the women discover they are writers. No one had invited them to write creatively so freely before, and they didn't even know what they had in them. Some of them started painting for the first time, and the results are breathtaking. If someone told you that you are not talented artistically, or you were made to feel that way for whatever reason, well, that's a bit of blasphemy. I'm sorry that happened to you, and I hope you will leave that idea on the altar right here, right now, today. One of the reasons I really want you, I implore you to think of yourself as creative is that you will feel more alive when you think that way. Days are less dull if you let that part of yourself come out. You find parts of yourself that you had no idea were in there, and it bestows one of the greatest gifts for life worth living and living a long life, not for nothing, the gift of curiosity. Our poet laureate, Billy Collins, talks about this when he's talking about the process of writing a poem. He said that most of his poems were written in one sitting. Could be 20 minutes, could be 6 hours. But once the poem starts, it's very much game on for me. I don't know where the poem's going in almost every case, and that's the curiosity that drives me. There's a shadow side, of course. There's a documentary about Will Barnett, the artist, where the point is made at the very root of being an artist, celebrated or undiscovered, is a life that requires intimacy with solitude. The blank canvas, the open sprung floor, the mocking blank page. When I was in the writer's studio, there was a tremendous preoccupation with the shitbird that sits on our shoulder and chirps that everything we write is garbage. We were chastened by William Stafford's line about There's no such thing as writer's block for writers whose standards are low enough. There are tormenting times in the act of creation, even as the earth heaves fire to produce its richest soil. Creation and creating is wonderful and terrifying. It's exhilarating and anxious-making. In other words, creating requires the whole of us, all of me. Why not take all of me? This morning's service is an example, as Jack pointed out. That historical note, that was the 1964 worship committee. Grace was on it. Thank you very much. The back history, this used to be a very formal service. 25-foot cross, people coming in robes, Bible held high. But by the early 60s, they were realizing that wasn't such a fit for the congregation at that time. And this agape service arose out of a desire to try to remember that historical night when Jesus was with his disciples, where friends were just eating and drinking at table, laughing and really not knowing what was coming next, even though they thought they did. So today, the bulletin is like Jack described it, mostly music, but that is not why we're doing it this way. Sorry, Jack, that is not why I asked that it be done this way. What I wanted to go for this morning was the collective experience that we are creating something out of nothing. Not completely, of course, but not knowing exactly what will come next. It can be very disorienting and frightening. But in what we are creating right now, in this moment, made sacred by the history that each one of you brings, all your God-given talents that you are willing to share, your very willingness to stay and give yourself to this moment, we are opening a space for the Spirit to breeze through the room. In creating, we say we are willing to risk, and most important, to feel vulnerable. We've talked about this a good bit. If you've not seen Brené Brown on feeling vulnerable and how that equates to joy in your life, I urge you to look it up, Brené Brown. In creation, we lay ourselves bare and we invite others to see what is in our hearts and minds. Our neighbor, Fred Hirsch, who is an amazing jazz artist, says that the work of an artist is to reveal himself. But how powerful that can be, how very much it costs to do that. And yet so many times I have been saved by Fred's music. There was a day I was saved by a Rothko painting. I lived surrounded by Lee Gilliat's flowers. And my grandmother's oil paintings that were first put to canvas 100 years ago. Did you know that modern art lines the hallways of Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles? The patients walk the halls, often connected to their IV poles, as they roll through the works of Chagall and Warhol and Oldenburg. It takes them out of their limited world of illness to a more expansive one, outside of themselves, and as Ezra so beautifully described it today, the wandering world that is within them. I'm not stalking you, but Jean Rayla reviewed a book on her blog called Art as Therapy, in which it suggested that art galleries be arranged according to the concerns of our soul, galleries of self-knowledge, love, fear, compassion, suffering. You could go for what you need. She writes, the idea that art can be more than an investment or a historical artifact or a piece of provocation that can lead and should and often does provide solace or remind you about the absurdity of life or just make you feel less alone, renewed my faith. And there it is. the full range of experience offered to you, born of solitude, but resulting in feeling less alone. This is the work of community, to bring forth the gifts, to help each other silence the shitbird and give the gift of grace. It is this grace that is so important for us to drink in deeply, early and often. I'm haunted by the words of David Foster Wallace, who spoke so honestly about this, about how the dangerous perfectionism is. He says, if your fidelity to perfectionism is too high, you never do anything. Because doing anything is actually kind of tragic, because you sacrifice how gorgeous and perfect it is in your head for what really is. By the way, when we went to New York 50 years ago, we visited the Museum of Modern Art, and I knew I would never forget that fuzzy teacup or Brancusi's bird in space. But I have to say, I spent the most time in front of Picasso's Guernica. The warring illustration was not lost on me, but more important, you could see the lines in the background, things he had painted or drawn and then abandoned without erasing them. I couldn't believe it. How could something so large and imperfect have such a place of prominence in a museum? I was utterly rattled and mystified. How incredibly imperfect is the cast of characters that make up our holy writings? Clearly, there wasn't a responsible editor around. The Bible is riddled with imperfect people, and there's no better example than David. Today's readings are two of my very favorite stories from the Bible. David had such a track record for murder and mayhem, and was on the precipice of creating something akin to that bloody red wedding in Game of Thrones. But he thought of a more creative response than the sword. By becoming the fool, he deflected a battle and certain death. Similarly, Shiphrah and Puah, they're rock stars. I mean, how cleverly they answer the Pharaoh's unthinkable plan. And here's where I want to suggest that our creative impulse is not limited to the arts per se, but to the moments that we create, the response we make to our world every day. I want you to start small. Just engage someone. You know, one of the great things about sitting at table like we do these Sundays is that we can actually look at each other. And if you need more proof, there's evidence that making these little moments just long enough to allow for synchronicity between you and someone else, it can actually make you happier. And it doesn't even matter if you know the person or not. Think about expanding your creativity at your home or at work, how you interact with people you live with or connect to. What if these encounters are blank pages ready to be written in a new way? Don't you feel that weariness comes from our lives when we feel that they are scripted? It feels like a prison to our souls, and I hate to say it, but that again leans toward the blasphemous. For what is gospel's good news but that change is possible? Is there a more radical idea than that? I hardly think so. I have to tell you something I can't really explain. I listen to books on tape to go to sleep. Highly recommend it. And in late April, it occurred to me that I never read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So I picked up the CD at Mulberry Street Library, and for the whole of May, Maya Angelou read me to sleep at night. I renewed it just to keep listening to her, the language, the voice, the remarkable story of her early life. How could this woman, abused and neglected, mute for almost 5 years because she felt her voice had killed her abuser, how could this woman rise? Pulitzer Prize, presidential medals, fluent in 6 languages. I mean, come on. Writer, dancer, sex worker, actor, director, teacher, honored one. If ever there was a creative spirit and one who mastered the art of seeing ways to create things anew, it was this phenomenal woman. The day before Angelo died, a little girl was born to Miriam Ibrahim, who was shackled in a Sudanese jail for the apostasy of marrying a Christian. The happy news is that yesterday word came that Miriam's death sentence has been lifted. I know this is likely just a coincidence, but the baby's name is Maya. I think about little Maya and the Maya we just lost, and how great lives can be lived if given a chance. And giving a chance requires that each of us invite the Spirit to give us eyes to see and ears to hear, the courage to create, and a chance on the dance floor with the Spirit. I'm going to leave you with the words of St. Kurt of Vonnegut. If you really want to hurt your parents and you don't have the nerve to be gay, the least you can do is go into the arts. I'm not kidding. The arts are not a way to make a living. They are a very human way of making life more bearable. Practicing an art, no matter how well or badly, is a way to make your soul grow, for heaven's sake. Sing in the shower, dance to the radio, tell stories, write a poem to a friend, even a lousy poem. Do it as well as you possibly can. You will get an enormous reward, he says. You will have created something. And all the people said, Amen and amen.